All right, Mark Rogers TV and Last Word on Sports, running down the BYU recruiting class from 2016 with Mitch Harper from KFAN 1320, and also doing some work for Rivals. Mitch, we tracked you down. It's good to see you, man.
Hey, happy to be on as always, Mark. Always love talking recruiting. It's always a great thing. So happy to be on the show and break it down.
Yeah, so let's talk with those guys about those guys that Cougar fans are extremely excited to see on the field starting in 2016. So if we're looking at the top of the class, some of those big recruits, who are we looking at?
Yeah, I mean it's a good class, and it's one that's got some star power at the top. For the first time since 2002, BYU has 4 players or more rated 4 stars or higher by Rivals.com. So it's been a while since BYU had this quality of talent at the top of the class. But the most notable players that I look at who I think could come in, make an instant impact, and be guys that are, I think, the top of the class. Handsome Tanielu, a defensive tackle from Snow College. He was he's a 4-star recruit, one of the top JC prospects, according to Rivals.com, and he was once a Utah commitment, and he had offers from more than 20 D1 schools. Texas even came in late. We saw what Texas did when they closed with their recruiting class. They really wanted Handsome Tanielu. He's an early signee, already enrolled at BYU, and he was Kalani Sitake's first actual commitment. So that was a big thing, too, to show how Kalani's success on the recruiting trail already had an instant impact landing Handsome Tanielu. And that was a significant deal because BYU, the last decade or so, they've played in either a 3-3-5 or a 3-4. Well, Kalani Sitake's background is a 4-3, and Handsome Tanielu that classic 4-3 interior lineman. So does that signal that BYU might be switching sooner than we think? I still would say he's probably going to be a defensive tackle in a 3-4 scheme this year, but once he gets to a senior season, I would expect BYU is going to probably be at a 4-3 eventually. But classic defensive tackle who I think is going to have an instant impact, and he's going to be someone I think is going to be starting day one when spring football starts. And spring football for BYU starts in less than 2 weeks. How crazy is that? But they're going to be. I think he's going to be someone that's starting right away and going to make an instant impact for BYU.
Mitch, 2 weeks till spring training, spring football.
Crazy, yeah.
A little sooner than that for spring training if we're going to talk baseball. But, man, you threw me off with that projection because I was going to close it out here in a few minutes by saying, hey, got to track you down for some spring football. But, man, we can turn around and talk some spring football here pretty soon. So that's probably the cream of the class at this point, at least on paper. Maybe if you go down the charts and the recruiting rankings in terms of individuals, maybe some guys that are off the radar, but you like what you see in regards to scouting reports, what you've heard, what you've possibly seen on tape.
Yeah, then that's kind of the theme a lot of times with BYU's recruiting class. I mean, BYU is a place where it's ultimately a developmental program. I mean, you're at BYU, you got some recruiting limitations. It's kind of tough sell to 18-year-old kids to say, hey, you're not going to have premarital sex, you're not going to smoke, and you can't drink either. There's an honor code you got to abide by. And, oh, by the way, it's a school that's 98% Mormon or LDS. So it's kind of a tough sell. But the thing is, BYU makes the most out of their opportunities in their recruiting niche. And Kalani Sitake has really identified personnel that I think that could develop into some quality players. And that's kind of his track record. If you go back to Kalani Sitake's time at Utah, he coached 14 players that went on to the NFL from Utah in the defensive ranks. And a lot of those guys came into Utah as either 2- or 3-star kids. So they ended up leaving basically as 5-star kids when you get drafted to the NFL. So that's his niche is development and identifying those diamonds in the rough. And what's also impressive too, before I get into some names that to keep an eye on that are under the radar, you know, one thing that was impressive to me about Kalani when he stepped into this job, he didn't lose any commitments. You know, usually when you see a coaching change, you have a few guys that say, you know, this coach, I don't really like his style. He's not for me. And all these kids were reaffirmed. They reaffirmed their commitments that were already committed to Bronco Mendenhall. And when he left for Virginia, they stayed committed to Kalani. And there was about 2 weeks where BYU didn't have a head coach. And that was during open recruiting season where, you know, there could have been contact had. And he didn't have that opportunity. So you get into January, and he only had 6 weeks to really nail down that class. And he didn't lose any commitment. So I think that was a huge thing for Sitake. But some of the under the radar guys that I look at that I really like, 3-star kid linebacker Alema Pilimai. He was once a Utah commit. He flipped on signing day. I think he's a really talented prospect. I think someone that could play in a lot of different spots on BYU's defense. He's going to start out as a strong safety, but I think eventually he's going to be an outside linebacker for BYU. But also another kid, two-star prospect out of California, Aliva Hifo. He's a guy that you could see a difference at either offense, defense, return game. He's expected to be a cornerback right away at BYU, but he could play wide receiver. He could have an impact in the return game. So I really like his abilities. But it's what's interesting too about BYU as well is, most schools you look at a day like signing day and think, oh, we got 20 guys that are going to come in and compete and push these upperclassmen for starting spots. But at BYU, you only get like 6, 7, maybe 8 guys that are actually going to matriculate into the program this fall. Because most of these kids, they go on LDS missions and serve for 2 years, and then the class is basically a 2018 kid. So it's a unique dynamic. And of BYU's 26 kids that they signed, only about 8 of them are actually going to be in campus this fall. And the guys that I'm going over, they're guys that are going to be in the program in 2016. So that makes things kind of interesting when you look at it that way and how the unique approach to BYU's recruiting.
Mitch Harper, 1320 KFAN, and also Rivals. Mitch, we're all aware as college football fans of the restrictions there at the school, but when you line them up, it kind of hits home of the challenges in recruiting, and it's remarkable the winning that is done there at BYU. And you mentioned probably the best class on paper since going back 13 years or 14 years to 2002. So let's look at positional need, because you lost a lot of production at wide receiver, maybe some other thin spots offensively, defensively, that could impact this class in regards to some kids that will need to step up.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. Wide receiver position is one that BYU is going to need some impact right away. And they lost Mitch Matthews, one of their best receivers the past 2 years. Big guy, 6'6". They also lost 6'5" receiver Taryn Hauk. So those are 2 of their top receivers now gone out the door due to graduation. So they got to replace that production. They got a kid in Jonah Trineman, a JC transfer, just like Handsome Tanielu, who I mentioned earlier. Jonah Trineman was one of the top JC prospects in the country out of Snow College. And that Snow College team, they were terrific. They had, I know you were talking with the Utah Block U writer a couple days ago. They had Garrett Bowles. They had 8 D1 prospects from one JC. Pretty impressive. And Jonah Trineman was one of the better prospects on that team, wide receiver, who I think, in my opinion, he's one of the in terms of just speed, I think he's the best receiver that BYU signed since the days of an Austin Collie, who had a stint in the NFL with the Indianapolis Colts and is now in the CFL. He's a flat-out burner. He can bust the lid off the top of a defense, and he's going to be someone that comes in this summer and going to be part of the spring training or summer training program and then get ready for fall camp to compete right away for a starting job. And I actually had the chance to talk with BYU's offensive coordinator, Ty Detmer, the once Heisman Trophy winner back in 1990, and he said that Jonah was a huge deal for us because we had to get him because they needed an instant upgrade in talent and speed at the wide receiver spot, because BYU the last few years they've had those big tall prospects, but they haven't had that just guy that can really be that deep threat. They've lacked that, and they now get that, I think, in Jonah Trineman, who I think is going to be terrific. He's someone that grew up a BYU fan in the backyard of BYU. Utah made a late push to try and sway him to the rival school, but he stayed committed to BYU, and it was a big get. And so wide receiver is definitely a spot where BYU needs to upgrade the talent. I think Jonah Trineman does that, but also defensive line. I already touched on it a little bit with Handsome Tanielu, but I'm really curious to see where BYU goes with the scheme, because again, I think they could potentially switch to a 4-3. They signed a lot of under the radar prospects that could be in the middle of that defensive line if they do in fact make the switch this year, because they lost Bronson Kaufusi. Kaufusi was someone who was at the Senior Bowl a couple weeks ago. He was terrific down the last stretch of his senior season a year ago. So they're going to have to replace a talented player in Kaufusi. But the thing is, BYU's team overall, they got a lot of strengths, I think, going into next season. There's not many holes in the starters. It's BYU's issue more times than not, and this has always kind of been a common theme, is the depth. BYU's top 22, top 23 players are always pretty good, and they can go toe-to-toe with anyone in the country. It's that depth. It's scholarships, 44 through 85. Those type of players, they got to really improve the talent there. And if they can do that and develop those guys, BYU then can be a team that you're looking at saying they can go toe-to-toe on a week-in, week-out basis with Power 5 teams because they're piecing together schedules that are going to be Power 5-esque, if you will. They're not quite to the level of those programs playing 8 and 9 games, but they were playing like 6 or 7 P5 teams here on a yearly basis the next few years. So they got to really increase the talent top to bottom. And this is laying the groundwork class for Kalani as he takes over this program.
Yeah, and when you look at Boise State, UCLA, Michigan, it could be argued that the September into October schedule for BYU was the toughest in the country. It was ridiculously brutal. Mitch Harper from 1320 KFAN and also Rivals. Before we let you go, Mitch, we hadn't had a chance to talk after the Las Vegas Bowl. I'm sorry to take you back there, but I'd love to get your response just in regards to the game because that was the game of the day on paper, the two best teams on the field. And then all of a sudden, I don't know how you could possibly write a worse script to the beginning of a game. I had to turn away from it, and then I saw it get close, and I was back, and I was in the middle of it in the fourth quarter. And it was just remarkable that the Cougars had the ball, and if Utah didn't gain those couple first downs to close out the game, you got a shot to tie the game and possibly win.
Yeah, I mean, if it was any other program, I would have probably just chalked it up to college kids probably hung over from party on the Las Vegas Strip the night before or something because it was just downright bad. I mean, I couldn't believe that terrible start. I mean, five straight drives, turnovers for BYU, and they got down 35-zip. They outgained Utah in yards in that first quarter, but Utah was up 35-0. It was a strange dynamic, and BYU made a valiant comeback. I mean, that was pretty impressive to see, and I think it showed the talent of a Tanner Mangum for BYU. But man, that was just and I think it was a tough game for BYU too because they had an opportunity to really clean the slate against Utah. To give the new head coach Kalani Stockey was announced later that day a chance to just kind of wipe the slate clean and have a fresh start, and not have to answer for this losing streak. And now BYU enters 2016 with 4 straight losses to Utah. I want to say 9 out of the last 11 they've lost to the Utes. So, man, Utah's really had, 9 of the last 12. So Utah's really had a stranglehold on this rivalry. But now it's a new chapter with Kalani Sitake and BYU. But yeah, that was just a strange game. I think it was even a game too that Utah was not even feeling happy about because you're up 35-zip and had to hold on at the end, and your offense was completely anemic. So it was just one of those games where no one was really satisfied with the result. But for BYU, it was just kind of a same old story where they dig themselves a hole against Utah, and that's too little, too late to catch up. But, man, 2016 will really set up nicely between BYU and Utah. Now that you factor in BYU brings back Taysom Hill, Tanner Mangum, how does that quarterback story play out? It's going to be fascinating to see. And BYU, just the unique storylines that go on in this program are always fun to keep tabs on.
And we'll talk about it soon, everybody. If you heard Mitch just a few minutes ago, 2 weeks. I can't believe that. It's the third week of February, and we're talking about spring football coming up in a couple of weeks. So that's good news for me because I can dive right into it, hopefully flag you down somewhere maybe mid-range in spring football and see what's going out there in Provo. Mitch Harper from 1320 KFAN, our Rivals as well, joining us here on MarkRogersTV. Mitch, it's always a good time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, Mark. Always happy to be on. Talk to you soon.